The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was unlike anything seen on Earth. It was a colossal chamber, built from a rare, shimmering metal that reflected the light of thousands of floating orbs. The ceiling stretched so high that the top was lost in a haze of blue mist, while the walls were engraved with the history of the oldest empires in the galaxy. Seated in an enormous circular arrangement were the representatives of the most powerful species in existence, creatures with multiple limbs, bioluminescent skin, and cold, calculating eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. Each one carried the weight of centuries, some even millennia, of interstellar politics. They had shaped the course of galactic history for as long as records existed, and today they had summoned the newest addition to their ranks. At the center of the room stood a single human, a man dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Ambassador Elias Carter, Earth's chosen diplomat, had been sent to represent humanity in what was considered the most important negotiation of the century. Humanity had been given a rare opportunity, a seat at the table of the most dominant species in the known universe. But this invitation did not come without conditions. Every species that had joined the Council before had done so by surrendering something: territory, technology, or even autonomy. The powerful empires did not welcome newcomers as equals. They demanded submission in exchange for survival. They expected the same from Earth. As Carter scanned the room, he could feel the weight of countless eyes on him. The HFY Dominion, a species resembling towering reptilian warlords, sat at one end of the chamber, their golden armor gleaming under the artificial light. The Kryn Syndicate, a race of insectoid strategists, clicked their mandibles in quiet discussion, their multifaceted eyes analyzing every movement he made. Then there was the Valtteri Imperium, humanoid in shape but far older than humans could comprehend, their violet-tinted skin giving them an ethereal presence. The council chamber was filled with beings who had seen humanity as a mere curiosity just a few decades ago. Now, they saw it as a potential threat. The council chairman, an elder of the HFY, finally spoke, his deep voice vibrating through the walls. Ambassador Carter of Earth, you stand before the Galactic Council to negotiate your place in the galactic order. We have reviewed your species' achievements, your recent expansion, and your technological advancements. It is the decision of this council that humanity must adhere to the conditions set forth in the proposed treaty. A holographic document materialized before Carter, listing the terms in glowing alien symbols that automatically translated into English. He had already studied it in detail before stepping foot in the chamber. The conditions were clear. Humanity would be given limited access to interstellar trade routes, certain scientific advancements would be restricted, and their military fleet would be placed under strict regulations. In exchange, Earth would be granted a place within the Council, but only as a lesser member with no real power. It was the same deal that countless other species have been forced to accept over the centuries, a deal designed to keep humanity contained. Carter did not react immediately. He knew that every move he made was being watched, analyzed, and dissected by some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy. Instead, he carefully reached out, slowly scrolling through the terms, feigning contemplation. Silence filled the room as the council members waited for his response, some already assuming that the humans, like so many before them, would comply without resistance. The treaty is quite comprehensive, Carter finally said, his voice calm and measured. It is clear that a great deal of thought has gone into ensuring stability within the council. He looked up, his gaze meeting the cold, reptilian eyes of the HFY leader. However, I am curious, how many of these terms were written with humanity's best interests in mind? A low murmur spread through the chamber. The Kryn delegate leaned forward, his mandibles twitching. You misunderstand, Ambassador. These terms are for the benefit of all. They are necessary to ensure peace and order in the galaxy. Surely, you would not question the wisdom of those who have guided interstellar civilization for eons. Carter allowed a small smile, though it did not reach his eyes. Wisdom is earned through experience, but control is taken by those who fear competition. The murmurs grew louder. A few of the smaller species seated at the edges of the chamber exchanged glances. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a species to challenge the council so openly, especially at their first negotiation. Most came begging for acceptance, eager to be part of the galactic community, no matter the cost. But Earth had not come begging. Earth had come prepared. The Valtteri representative, her violet eyes studying him with cold curiosity, finally spoke. "You are bold, Ambassador Carter. Perhaps too bold. The Council does not offer alternatives. You will find that refusal is not an option that benefits your people." Carter's expression remained steady. He knew what they were doing. This was not a negotiation. It was a test. They wanted to see how easily humanity could be intimidated. They expected hesitation, perhaps a weak attempt at compromise. What they did not expect was the quiet confidence with which he straightened his tie, took a step forward, and spoke his next words with absolute certainty. "Earth rejects these terms." The chamber fell into utter silence. Not a single voice spoke, not a single sound echoed through the vast hall. The air itself seemed to freeze as the weight of his words settled upon the council. The XL-FAR leader narrowed his reptilian eyes, the Kryn representative twitched in agitation, and the Valtteri Imperium remained eerily still. For the first time in centuries, a species had openly defied the will of the Galactic Council. The chairman's voice was dangerously low when he finally spoke. "Ambassador Carter, do you understand the consequences of your words?" Carter met his gaze without a hint of fear. "Perfectly." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small holographic device. With a simple press, a new image appeared before the council, a classified report, decrypted and exposed for all to see. It contained intercepted communications between the major council factions, detailing plans to restrict humanity's access to resources, to stifle its growth, to ensure that Earth never became a true power. Gasps rippled through the chamber as the evidence illuminated in front of them. Some of the smaller species, who had long suspected the Council's manipulations but never had proof, now saw the truth. The illusion of fairness shattered in an instant. Carter calmly turned off the device and placed it back into his pocket. "Earth will not be bound by fear," he said, his voice unwavering. "We came here to negotiate as equals, not as subjects. If the Council is unwilling to offer a fair agreement, then humanity has no interest in joining." With that, he turned and began walking toward the exit, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence. Some council members sat frozen in disbelief, others whispered among themselves, realizing that the power they had held for so long had just been challenged. For the first time in galactic history, a species had stood up to the council and walked away unbroken. And with that single act, the balance of power had begun to shift. As Ambassador Elias Carter walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, the silence behind him was deafening. His rejection of the treaty had sent shockwaves through the assembly, and he knew that the real battle was just beginning. Humanity had defied the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and that was not something they would forget. He had barely stepped into the corridors of the vast council complex when his personal communicator vibrated. A single message appeared on the small holographic screen. "You have made a mistake. We should talk." The sender was unknown, but Carter knew better than to ignore it. He had expected retaliation, but the speed at which it came was concerning. Someone was already moving against him. He continued walking, his polished shoes tapping softly against the pristine metallic floor, his mind racing through possible scenarios. There were many who wanted Earth to submit, and some who wanted it gone altogether. As he reached the diplomatic quarters, a figure was waiting for him in the dimly lit hallway. A tall, slender being with smooth violet-tinted skin and piercing silver eyes. It was the Valtteri representative, Soraya Vex, one of the most influential voices in the council. Unlike the others, she had not reacted in anger when Carter had rejected the treaty. She had watched him with an unsettling curiosity, as if she had expected it all along. "You are either the bravest or the most foolish diplomat I have ever seen, Ambassador Carter," Soraya said, her voice calm yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Few have ever defied the Council, and none have done so without consequences." Carter did not let his expression change. He had dealt with powerful figures before, but there was something about Soraya that made him wary. She was not like the others. While the HFY relied on brute force and the Kryn on deception, the Volteri played a different game. They operated in shadows, manipulating events long before their enemies even realized they were being played. "I assume you didn't stop me just to admire my courage," he said smoothly. "What is it you really want?" Soraya took a slow step forward, her silver eyes locked onto his. "The Council will not accept your rejection quietly. There are forces at play that go beyond simple diplomacy. You are standing in the path of something far greater than you realize. Humanity may think itself ready for the galactic stage, but you have made powerful enemies today." Carter studied her carefully, searching for the hidden meaning in her words. "Is that a warning or a threat?" "A warning," she replied, tilting her head slightly. "The Kryn Syndicate and the HFY Dominion have already begun discussions on how to deal with your defiance. Some believe economic sanctions will be enough. Others whisper of less subtle measures." Carter knew what she meant. Humanity had many colonies, trade agreements, and alliances forming with independent systems. If the Council wanted to make Earth suffer, they had many ways to do it. Blockades, sabotage negotiations, even direct military action disguised as interventions. The Council had done it before to others who had refused their rule. There were species that had once flourished, only to be erased from history when they became inconvenient to the great powers. "And what about you?" Carter asked. "Are you here to offer me a way out?" Soraya's lips curled into the faintest smile, one that did not reach her eyes. "I am here to tell you that not everyone in the Council agrees with the treaty. There are those who see potential in humanity, who believe the old ways must change. But change is dangerous. If you wish to survive what comes next, you will need allies." Carter crossed his arms, keeping his expression neutral. "And let me guess, you're offering to be one of those allies." "I am offering knowledge," Soraya corrected him. "The Kryn and the HFY are not just discussing how to punish humanity. They are considering something far worse. There is an ancient directive within the Council, one that has not been used in centuries. A protocol that allows for the complete removal of a species deemed too dangerous for the balance of power." Carter felt a cold realization settle in his chest. "Genocide," he said, his voice steady but firm. Soraya nodded. "The Kryn have always believed in eliminating problems before they grow. The HFY see war as the only true law. If enough members of the Council agree, they could declare Earth a threat to galactic stability. Once that happens, it will not be negotiations you face, it will be extinction." For the first time since entering the Council chamber, Carter felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was not just about trade restrictions or political maneuvering. It was about survival. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, but the powerful factions of the Council did not want rivals. They wanted submission or destruction. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" Carter said, narrowing his eyes. "That's why you haven't spoken against me in the Council. You're watching to see if I survive." Soraya's smile grew just a little wider. "Survival is the first test of all great civilizations, Ambassador. If you cannot weather the storm, then perhaps your species was never meant to last." Carter exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain calm. He had spent years preparing for this role, training in diplomacy, studying alien cultures, learning how to navigate the most dangerous negotiations. But nothing had prepared him for the possibility that Earth itself could be erased from existence. The Council was not just a political body, it was a battlefield, and humanity had just walked straight into the crossfire. "Tell me," he said finally, "if I refuse to back down, What happens next? Soraya turned slightly, her gaze shifting toward the long corridor that led deeper into the diplomatic wing. That depends on how well you play the game. You have made enemies, but you have also drawn attention from those who seek change. If you can prove that humanity is more than just a defiant species, if you can show that Earth is not so easily broken, then you might just force the Council to reconsider. And if I fail? Soraya met his eyes one last time. Then Earth will burn, and history will forget it ever existed. Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the dimly lit corridor, leaving Carter alone with his thoughts. He knew what needed to be done. This was no longer about treaties or negotiations. It was about making a stand, not just for humanity, but for the future of every species that had ever been crushed under the weight of the Council's rule. As he turned back toward his quarters, his mind was already forming a plan. If the Council wanted a war, then he would give them something far worse, a revolution. And this time, it would be the great empires of the galaxy who would learn what it meant to fear. The Galactic Council chamber was eerily silent, an unnatural stillness filling the vast hall as representatives from hundreds of species stared at the lone human standing before them. Ambassador Elias Carter remained firm, his hands clasped behind his back, his face betraying no emotion. The towering, multi-tiered chamber, carved from polished obsidian and glowing with ethereal blue light, had never before witnessed such a defiant moment. The Council had expected negotiations, compromises, perhaps even a desperate plea for mercy. But not this. Not a complete rejection. High Chancellor Vorix of the Kryn Syndicate leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. His scaled fingers tapped against the podium before him, the sharp clicks echoing ominously. Ambassador Carter, his deep, guttural voice rumbled, thick with restrained hostility. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. We have offered Earth a path forward, a way to exist within the established order. Yet you refuse. Do you realize what you are doing? Carter let the words settle, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew what was at stake. He had seen the classified reports, the hidden atrocities committed against civilizations that had dared to stand alone. The so-called treaty was a thinly veiled ultimatum. Accept the terms, surrender sovereignty, or face annihilation. Humanity would be reduced to nothing more than another subjugated species, their world stripped of resources, their people governed by alien laws. But he had not come this far just to bow. No, Chancellor Vorix, Carter said, his voice steady, unwavering. There is no misunderstanding. Earth refuses the treaty. We reject your terms in full. A wave of murmurs and hushed whispers rippled through the chamber. Some representatives exchanged worried glances, while others barely concealed their amusement. The Kryn and Tel-Far were known for their brutality. No species had ever openly defied them and survived. Seated to the right, Supreme Commander Ralvik of the XL-Far Dominion bared his jagged teeth, his massive, armored frame tense with barely contained fury. His people thrived on war, on conquest, and Carter's words had triggered something primal within him. You overestimate your value, human, he growled. Your kind is young, weak. You stand alone in a galaxy where only the strong survive. Rejecting our generosity is not courage, it is suicide. Carter met Ralvik's glare without flinching. Then perhaps it is time the Council learns what humanity is truly capable of. The room erupted into chaos. Shouts overlapped in a dozen languages, some in anger, others in disbelief. The tension was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken threats. The Council had anticipated negotiations, but Carter had not played their game. He had shattered their expectations, and now they were scrambling to make sense of it. Among the sea of outraged faces, Soraya Vex of the Valteri watched in silence, her expression unreadable. Carter had seen the curiosity in her eyes before. She had warned him of the dangers ahead, had hinted at hidden forces working behind the scenes. Now she observed him, as one would a rare phenomenon, uncertain whether to admire or fear what they had just witnessed. Chancellor Vorix exhaled slowly, his cold gaze fixed on Carter. "Do you believe Earth can stand against us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have no allies, no fleets powerful enough to challenge us. We control the trade routes. We control the flow of resources. Without our approval, Earth will wither." Carter allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You mistake independence for isolation," he said. "Earth does not need your approval. You have ruled through fear for too long, and perhaps that fear kept others in line. But that is changing. There are those who have suffered under your rule, who whisper of resistance but dare not act. What happens when they see humanity standing unbroken? What happens when they realize they are not alone?" The murmurs grew louder. It was not just the threat of war that unsettled the council. It was the idea that humanity's defiance might inspire others. The iron grip the great powers held over the galaxy was built on the illusion of control, but illusions could be shattered. Ralvik's claws curled into fists, his armored shoulders rising and falling with barely restrained rage. "You think you can start a rebellion," he snarled. "You think your words will bring down empires." Carter's voice remained calm, but his eyes burned with conviction. "I think revolutions begin when people are no longer afraid." Silence. The weight of his words settled over the chamber like a storm cloud. For the first time, the Kryn and Telfar did not look at humanity as an inconvenience, but as a threat, and that was exactly what Carter wanted. Soraya Vex finally spoke, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You have made your decision, Ambassador Carter. But decisions have consequences. Do you understand what you have set in motion?" Carter turned to her, nodding once. "Completely." The High Chancellor's expression darkened. "Then let it be known," Vorix declared, his voice echoing through the chamber, "that the Kryn Syndicate and the HFY Dominion will take all necessary actions to maintain order. If Earth chooses defiance, then Earth will face the consequences." Carter simply inclined his head. "Then we'll see who stands in the end." With that, he turned and walked out of the council chamber, leaving behind a storm of outrage, fear, and uncertainty. He had thrown the first stone into the waters of galactic politics, and the ripples would soon become waves. The council had expected submission, but instead they had been given something far more dangerous: resistance. And in the depths of space, hidden among the shadows, those who had long yearned for freedom were listening. The air inside the Galactic Council chamber was heavy with tension. Ever since the human diplomat, Elias Carter, had rejected the treaty, the balance of power in the galaxy had begun to shift. No one had expected such defiance from a species as young as humanity. The great empires had ruled unchallenged for centuries, their dominance secured through fear, coercion, and ruthless efficiency. But something had changed. The council chambers, once filled with quiet murmurs of compliance, now echoed with uncertainty and hushed conversations about the unthinkable: resistance. High Chancellor Vorix of the Kryn Syndicate sat in his elevated seat, his reptilian eyes scanning the assembly. He could feel the undercurrent of unease running through the council members. Fear was a powerful tool, but it was also fragile. Once broken, it was nearly impossible to restore. Humanity's rejection of their authority had sparked something dangerous: hope. And hope was a fire that could spread faster than any fleet could extinguish. At the opposite end of the chamber, Supreme Commander Ralvik of the HFY Dominion radiated barely contained rage. His species valued strength above all, and to him, humanity's defiance was not just an insult, it was a direct challenge. He had expected Earth to be crushed by now, isolated and struggling without the resources of the galactic network. Yet, reports from the outer systems suggested otherwise. Trade ships had been sighted moving towards human-controlled space, their origins unknown. Allied fleets that once swore loyalty to the Council were hesitating, their commanders delaying orders, watching, waiting. It was clear. The balance of power was shifting, and humanity had become the fulcrum upon which the future of the galaxy now rested. Soraya Vex of the Volteri remained silent as she observed the unfolding drama. She had seen the signs long before the others, the whispers of discontent, the growing resentment among the smaller factions. The Council had believed they could keep control forever, but their arrogance had blinded them. The moment Carter had refused to bow, he had given every oppressed species a reason to question their submission. A single act of defiance had done what centuries of diplomacy and warfare had failed to accomplish. It had fractured the illusion of absolute control. A low hum filled the chamber as the holographic display activated, projecting real-time reports of fleet movements across the galaxy. What had once been a stable map of dominion and order now showed growing instability. Minor factions that had never dared to resist were suddenly fortifying their borders. Secret communications were being exchanged between systems once thought loyal to the Council, and at the center of it all, Earth stood defiant, untouched by the chaos, yet undeniably the cause of it. "This is unacceptable," Ralvik growled, his deep voice echoing across the chamber. "Humanity must be made an example. If we allow this to continue, more will follow." His claws dug into the metal railing before him. "We should have crushed them the moment they refused our terms." Vorix remained still, his gaze shifting towards Soraya. "And yet," he said slowly, "they have not been crushed. Tell me, Soraya Vex, what do your informants say?" She leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. "They say that the tide is turning, Chancellor, that the galaxy is watching, that your threats no longer inspire the fear they once did." Her voice was smooth, calculated, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. "Humanity has done something remarkable. They have shown that your power is not absolute. And now, others are starting to wonder, what happens if they refuse as well?" A silence followed her words, heavier than before. The Kryn and Selthar had ruled with intimidation, crushing those who opposed them before the seeds of rebellion could take root. But now, those seeds had been scattered across the stars, and the Council had no way to stop them from growing. Ralvik's patience snapped. "Enough of this," he snarled. "If we do not act now, we will lose control. Humanity is a disease. We must cut it out before it spreads further." He turned toward Vorix. "Authorize the attack. Send the fleet to Earth. Show them what happens to those who defy us." Vorix considered the demand, his sharp claws tapping against the armrest of his seat. He had ruled through fear for a long time, and it had served him well. But this was different. Humanity was not like the others. They were unpredictable, reckless, but above all, dangerous. If he ordered an attack and failed to destroy them completely, the consequences would be disastrous. The galaxy would see their survival as a sign of weakness, and weakness invited rebellion. He exhaled slowly. "No," he said at last. "Not yet." Ralvik turned sharply. "Not yet. Have you lost your nerve?" Vorix's gaze was cold, his voice sharp. "You do not understand what is at stake. Humanity has been underestimated before, and every time, it has cost us. If we move against them without absolute certainty of victory, we may find ourselves in a war that cannot be won." The words sent a ripple of shock through the chamber. The thought of an unwinnable war had never crossed their minds. The Kryn and Selthar were the most powerful factions in the galaxy. No species had ever dared to challenge them directly. And yet here was Vorix, suggesting that humanity, one single species, could pose a threat they could not afford to ignore. Ralvik's fury was palpable, but he held his tongue. The room was already shifting. Some council members were nodding subtly, others exchanging glances filled with uncertainty. The unthinkable was becoming a possibility. Soraya Vex watched it all with a knowing look. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when the great empires would finally feel the weight of their own arrogance. Power shift was already happening. It was no longer about whether humanity would survive. It was about what came next. As the meeting concluded, Vorix issued a final warning. "Monitor their movements. Watch them closely. If the time comes for war, we will strike. But not yet. His eyes darkened. Because if we fail, the galaxy will never be ours again. As the council members dispersed, the realization settled over them like a shadow. The old order was crumbling. The Kryn and Telthar were no longer invincible, and humanity, whether they intended to or not, had become the force that would decide the future of the galaxy. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. The air was thick with tension as representatives from dozens of species sat in uneasy silence. The old order, the balance of power that had governed the galaxy for centuries, had been shaken to its core. Humanity, a species once dismissed as insignificant, had defied the Council, rejected their authority, and stood against their threats. And now, the consequences of that defiance were unfolding in ways no one had foreseen. Chancellor Vorix of the Kryn Syndicate watched the growing unease with careful calculation. The council members, once confident in their dominance, now whispered in hushed voices, their eyes filled with doubt. Reports from the outer systems painted a grim picture. Alliances were shifting, old enemies were making secret pacts, and the fear that had once kept the galaxy under control was beginning to fade. It was no longer just about humanity. Their defiance had ignited something far greater, something that even Vorix himself could not fully control. Supreme Commander Ralvik of the Far Dominion sat rigidly, his claws gripping the armrests of his seat. His species had built its empire through conquest, through the sheer strength of its warriors. And yet now, they faced an enemy they could not crush so easily. Humanity was different. They were unpredictable, adaptable, and worst of all, they inspired others to fight. Where once the Council's threats would have silenced any resistance, now there was hesitation. Some factions were delaying their response, waiting to see what Earth would do next. Others were openly questioning their loyalty to the Council. The thought made Ralvik's blood boil. At the far end of the chamber, Soraya Vex of the Volteri sat in quiet observation, her expression unreadable. She had seen this shift coming long before the others. Humanity's defiance was not just an isolated event. It was a spark in a dry forest, and the flames were spreading rapidly. For centuries, the Council had ruled with fear, but now that fear was breaking. The galaxy was beginning to wake up, and for the first time in generations, the possibility of change was real. The silence was broken by the sound of heavy footsteps as Elias Carter, the human diplomat, entered the chamber. His presence alone was enough to send a ripple of unease through the room. He walked with a calm confidence, his expression neutral yet unshaken. Unlike the other species, humans did not rely on displays of power or intimidation. They did not need to. Their strength came from something far more dangerous: conviction. He stopped at the center of the room and let his gaze sweep across the assembled leaders. "You called for me," he said, his voice steady. "So here I am." Vorix leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "You have forced a crisis upon this council, Carter. Your actions have disrupted the order that has kept this galaxy in balance for centuries." His voice was controlled, but there was an undeniable tension beneath it. "Tell me, was that your plan all along?" Carter met his gaze without flinching. "No," he said simply, "but I won't apologize for it either. You expected us to kneel, to obey without question, like so many others before us. You thought fear would be enough. But humanity has never been ruled by fear." He took a step forward. "And now, others are beginning to understand that they don't have to be either." A murmur swept through the chamber. Some members shifted uncomfortably, while others watched Carter with newfound curiosity. He was saying what many had been too afraid to voice. Ralvik bared his teeth. "You speak as if you've already won, but Earth is alone. You have no allies, no fleet that can match ours. If war comes, your people will be the first to fall." Carter didn't blink. "Are you so sure about that?" His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made even Ralvik hesitate. "The moment you attack us, you'll be making a choice, not just for yourselves, but for the entire galaxy. Do you really think every species will stand by and watch? Do you think they will fight for you, knowing that they could be next? Shariah Vex smiled faintly. It was a masterstroke. Carter wasn't just standing up to the council. He was forcing them to question their own power. If they crushed Earth, they would prove themselves the tyrants that many already suspected they were. And if they failed, the illusion of their dominance would shatter completely. Vorix exhaled slowly. You believe you've changed everything, don't you? His voice was quieter now, more thoughtful. That this moment is the beginning of something new. Carter's expression remained steady. I don't believe it, he said. I know it. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. The weight of his words hung over them like a storm cloud. The old era of absolute rule was crumbling. The council could no longer rely on fear alone. The galaxy was watching, waiting, and choosing its side. For the first time in centuries, the future was uncertain. But one thing was clear. A new era had begun.